the U.S. is the world's #1 arms dealer. And so there's like a whole lot of people in Washington who are eager to tell D.C. about how if you sell bombs to this person, it will advance human rights, or it will be America first, or it will be whatever the hell the thing is that you care about. Just let me continue making and selling these bombs.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Always at War, the only podcast in the known universe, attempting to answer the question, why is the United States always, perpetually, constantly at war? We are brought to you by the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, a think tank dedicated to building a world where peace is the norm and war is the exception. I'm Courtney Rawlings, here with Alex Jordan. Alex Jordan, how you doing?
Courtney, I'm doing good. I'm moving right now, so this is a different shot than you usually get, but I added, helpfully, this globe.
Yeah, you look like a villain.
Yeah, exactly. This is where I pick the next city that I'm going to destroy with my nuclear weapons.
Like Pinky in the Brain, like, what's next on my list of places to destroy?
I've not earned like my professorial cred or whatever nearly enough to have this, but we saw it at a vintage store recently, and it fits the vibe. Besides my great interior design proclivities, what do you want to talk about today? There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. Thank you for asking. Totally natural. I wanted to talk to you about if either of the parties that comprise America's totally democratic political system are anti-war parties. And I thought
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. End of episode.
I guess it'll be more of like a why. But it's like the first thing that came to mind when we decided to talk about this was that meme. I know you've seen it. Like, we'll put it on the screen, but I know you've seen it, of like the bomber jet flying over some unknown city, dropping a bomb. And it's like the Republican, it's like a plane, you know what? And then it's like Democrat, and it's like has like the gay flag, the Black Lives Matter, like all the like insignia of liberalism all over it, also dropping a bomb. And it's like the two parties.
Yeah, it's like militarism, or like militarism with a human rights sheen.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there is no other option. I always think about that meme. I think it's like one of the funniest ones ever.
Yes.
And I think it perfectly encapsulates what we're talking about today.
Well, I was going to say, like any meme, its sticking power is in its like universal truth that it gets at something greater. And it definitely does.
Yeah, and I kind of like, I mean, sometimes people, especially people who spend too much time online, or you know, just is actually kind of normal for the kind of political climate, will be like, oh my gosh, it's transpartisan. They don't know what that means, so I normally say bipartisan, whatever. Bipartisan think tank that you work at, like, how do you deal? And I'm like, yeah, we have one thing in common here. Well, actually, we have lots of in common, but like, it is very easy to work with people whose shared value is not that meme.
I definitely have had a lot of people ask me, like, how do you work with people with such different political beliefs than you? And I think that it's like, when every day the thing you're talking about is like American weapons of war, like enabling the slaughter of like innocent civilians in Gaza or whatever, like we share in the moral opprobrium and outrage and everything, and all the rest, I think rightly seems like less relevant than the mission of like restraining this, you know, destructive, murderous foreign policy that we have, and that is shared at the heights of both political parties.
When they do talk of peace, it's basically pretend, or in the guise of humanitarianism on the Democratic side, or in the guise of America First on the Republican side. It's always just talk, because, I mean, as so many of our episodes have touched on, there's just too much money, too many vested interests, too many reasons to keep the war machine going. Like the options are war with Russia or war with China. There is no like there's no third option. It's like, which one?
There is no like, maybe
choose your fighter.
Like, maybe great power war is a bad idea and we could like take another direction. I think it's definitionally true to say there's not much of a difference when it comes to matters of U.S. foreign policy between the parties. There's differences on the margin, but just like look at the incredible continuity between administrations. Like from George W. Bush to Obama, Obama ramped up the global war on terror, and sure, eventually turned down the war in Iraq, but then ramped up the drone wars, which Trump took
Yeah.
over and expanded. And then, Biden ran against continuing to arm the Saudi UAE war in Yemen, which killed hundreds of thousands. And then when he got into office, it was like, well, actually, we do need to sell offensive weapons to the Saudis. And then Biden had full backing for Israel's destruction and slaughter in Gaza, and then Trump took office and continued it. And there's not voters, Democratic participation does not give people the opportunity to choose anything but war or war with a different character, or war with a different country. But there's not a political program on offer from either party, seriously. Like, and again, there are individuals who are good on these issues, but by and large, the parties themselves and the party leaderships are very invested in the continuation of global U.S. military primacy, and brook very little criticism of the consequences and costs of that pursuit.
Yeah, I think the war, Israel's war in Gaza, I mean, Israel's slaughter in Gaza is a great example, I think, of what you're pointing at, which is support for Israel's genocidal war in Gaza is at an all-time low. I think as more and more people recognize um, Israel's actions as, yeah, gross offenses of not just human rights, but war atrocities and genocidal actions. And it has had very little, maybe a slow trickle effect, this kind of wide held belief that Israel's doing wrong in Gaza. It has a very slow effect on our representatives who are supposed to represent our interests, but tend to represent the interests of the companies selling weapons to Israel, of Israel. This is not an episode about Israel, but I think it's just a good example of how little power everyday people have, even in swaying their own representatives who claim to be their, you know, like earning their vote. And yet, like, that rarely, I think, like, it rarely, but is starting to have some effect on how our representatives act. I think foreign policy was such a background issue for so long, and the age of social media has changed that. It's made it a foregrounded so many issues, Ukraine and Gaza being two of the the most heightened examples of that. And they now are going to have to try and be a little bit more beholden to, Americans and their voters, their districts' interests. Though I don't think that that's really clicked with anyone yet.
Well, I do feel like what you can see is that politicians recognize that being skeptical of war and military intervention is good politics.
Hmm.
Like, very much, I think the case has been made pretty convincingly that Trump running against the Iraq war in 2016 and pointing at Hillary and pointing at all the other Republicans on the stage during the primary and saying these guys all voted for this BS and it was a disaster. It would have never happened under me. I would have ended it, or I would have never gone there.
Hmm.
Um, and then similarly, Biden running against Trump, pointed at Trump's assassination of Soleimani, pointed at some of Trump's like most militarist mistakes that he made in that first term, or mistakes probably uh, doesn't give him enough credit for intending to do these things and intending their results. But Biden and Jake Sullivan talked about foreign policy for the middle class.
God.
Orienting America's approach on the campaign trail. The conversation was about bringing U.S. empire home and reorienting U.S. approach to the world around what's best for Americans. And then when he got into office, that was not was not the driving influence of his administration's policy. I mean, the Afghanistan withdrawal is the notable exception, the notable, incredibly important exception.
It's funny
But
that you say, yeah. Well, I was just funny that you say that about Biden because I had never made the connections between the foreign policy for the middle class and the America Firstisms that came out, and I think it speaks to what I was kind of hinting at, which is that foreign policy has become more and more important to everyday people. We're so used to having power stripped from us as voters, but it does like the very fact that they even pretended, right, to make foreign policy about everyday people. I'm like, okay, wow, I think maybe it's becoming more part of a conversation.
that's such a good point. Like in
I
that,
make great points.
of course, no, but it's very much along the lines of what we were saying. Like
Well,
they recognize they can't not talk about this, and they recognize that people who grew up during the Iraq War saw it happen, saw the bodies come back, saw Iraq being left no better off from this like expansive military mission, or Libya, or like name a
yeah.
modern military intervention that's had disastrous effects. Much
Name
like
a modern military
yeah.
mission that has has not
but
had.
but but like they knew that people have internalized some of those lessons
Yeah.
and that they have to motion towards those things being true and those things being recognized. But in the end, from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump, what direction did military spending go? Up.
Yeah.
What directionality is there in U.S. foreign policy? Like more expansive, more conflicts, more fingers in different pies, and the fact that they acknowledge the politics of it is a good step. But then the question of like what actually drives their decision making in office, it is these structural incentives and forces that we've talked about, that push them towards trying. They've got the military hammer and every problem seems like a nail.
Like 10,000%. I think like basically I mean, everything we've spoken about. Like when we discussed talking about this on the episode, I was like, okay, what am I even going to talk about? And my first thing that I was like, wanted to talk about was like congressional, Congress owning, uh, like Lockheed Martin stocks, right?
Yes.
Like that's just like one
Yes.
example. We've already done a whole podcast of it, but like I think like voting on Israel, like I mean, I
Yes.
always come back to this. Like I mean, the people, on like yeah, sure, Americans' minds have changed, and yet if you look at the voting records, it's like it doesn't matter what you or I think about Israel's
Mm-mm.
actions in Gaza.
Mm-mm. No, not at all. I mean, if you look at the votes for funding Israel, right, in the months after October 7th, the Hamas's October 7th attack, and if you look at like some of the more recent, votes surrounding like whether or not to block funding for Israel, there is still a large bipartisan majority in both parties that prioritizes standing with Israel no matter what, even as
Yeah.
they commit the genocide, using our weapons, using our intelligence support, using our diplomatic cover. And I mean, I think one of the things that's so frustrating, that I've seen play out when I've been at the Quincy Institute is, like you've mentioned, we're transpartisan. Like our issue is like ending this like terrible course of U.S. foreign policy. Whether that's energy is coming from the right or the left, we are trying to like build a coalition of Americans who are like saying, stop this BS. And it's really funny how in partisan politics, people are really, really willing to like let slide if it's
Mm-hmm.
their side doing it. Under the Trump administration, support for Israel has continued. But we're seeing Democrats seemingly like wake up to the horrors that Biden first enabled. Now that Trump is the one enabling it, or
Right.
under Biden, you saw people who were very loudly against Trump arming the Saudi UAE coalition war in Yemen, then sort of give Biden a pass when he said, actually, yeah, we should provide support for this after pledging to do the opposite during the campaign. Like
Yes.
partisanship gives both parties, they allow them to let their own people off because like, well, they're making this tough choice to support a military intervention in X country, but it's because it's the right thing and they're doing it wisely and smartly smartly. The mistakes are always the other people's fault, even if they're
Oh my
like
gosh.
categorically the exact same mistakes. Like Biden bombing Yemen got very little pushback from congressional Democrats. When Trump bombs Yemen, you see much more.
It makes me kind of like sickened by our representatives, right? Who can so like quickly pretend, first of all, that we don't remember, and then feign ignorance of their own. Like, oh, well, how dare Trump bomb Yemen? By the way, I've voted to, or didn't care to push a vote on bombing Yemen under Biden, didn't care to push a vote under Biden over whoever, et cetera, et cetera. And there's all this like kind of like internal back and forth, but it assumes, right, that Americans have short-term memory loss. And sometimes
Yes,
we do, right? And
we do.
sometimes things are underreported. But that's just such a disgusting thing for our own representatives to believe about us and then go and like hawk the other side. I think my
Yes.
favorite example, which I think really, really bugs me, right, is Trump nominally gestured to a more peaceful future during his campaign trail. What did Kamala Harris do? Honey, she went up on that podium and said, we are going to be the most lethal military like ever known. I'm like, first of all, we already are, honey. And what are you talking about? Like, that's not where the people are. And like
Yes, but
waiting for applause on that was like grotesque. And it was just to be not Trump.
it recalls John Kerry's, I don't know if you recall, I remember watching it, the reporting for duty convention speech that he
You're
gave
like
in
way older than
2004.
me, so
It's true. I'm a couple decades older than you.
yeah.
But like the whole idea is like we have our patriot who's going to do the Iraq war like the right way. And like guess what? Like trying to out hawk the hawkish president in office, he just got accused of being like faking all of his military service or whatever.
John Kerry has not been honest.
And he lacks the capacity to lead.
When the chips were down, you could not count on John Kerry.
John Kerry is no war hero.
There's this constant like, well, I'm going to out muscle the other guy. I'm going to be stronger against terror. I'm going to be stronger against name the enemy. I mean, this is what was going in with, I don't know if you recall, before the Israel-Iran war broke out, the Trump administration was actually engaged in some diplomacy with Iran around their nuclear program. And Schumer put out this video. Here, we'll show it.
Oh my God.
When it comes to negotiating with the terrorist government of Iran, Trump's all over the lot. One day he sounds tough, the next day he's backing off. And now, all of a sudden, we find out that Witkoff and Rubio are negotiating a secret side deal with Iran. What kind of bull is this? They're going to sound tough in public and then have a side deal that lets Iran get away with everything? That's outrageous. We need to make that side deal public. Any side deal should be before Congress and, most importantly, the American people. If Taco Trump is already folding, the American public should know about it. No side deals.
Also, the taco thing?
Yes, exactly. He said like Trump better not chicken out and go soft on Iran by like striking some sort of deal to prevent conflict. And it's like, so, but no matter who,
chicken soft tacos, which I gotta say, I would be like, well, Trump's onto something. I love chicken soft tacos. Love all soft tacos.
Yeah. So like just the idea being that no matter who's in office, the other side is going to attack them as weak. And they are going to feel convinced that they need to show themselves to be strong or whatever. And so all of the attention and the energy from either side is going towards more war. And I mean, this is a separate like issue, but the same with the media. Like if you ever listen to those questions, like when Biden was in the press conference or when Trump is inviting reporters into the Oval Office, so often the questions are like, what are you going to do about it? Like what action are you going to take to solve this problem? Like, are you going to send more weapons? Are you going to do this bomb? Are you going to approve this or that? And there is just like this constant political pressure towards do somethingism, and necessarily doing something looks like military action, regardless of whether or not that's actually like what's called for or what's wise to undertake to address a given challenge.
I want to talk about like what, if anything, has changed since the war on terror, kind of like the height of the war on terror, because it does seem to me that Americans are less convinced that constant warfare is the answer. Of course, like my knee-jerk response is things have changed economically, and both sides of the aisle are feeling that. And we're like, why? Wait, sorry, we're sending $1 trillion where? Right? Like
Right.
that is like
Right.
my sense. I don't know if that's what everyone's thinking, but like the, quote unquote foreign policy for the middle class. Why is there a class aspect there? America first is a little bit different, right? But it's like, let us not look outside of ourselves to kind of focus. By the way, now I think the ADL said that America First is a slur, or no, not a slur. It's hate
Hateful
speech.
language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's neither here nor there. Well, it is actually both places. But like something has changed. I'm thinking economics. Do you have any sense of what's changed?
I mean, I do think so. I not to go too heavy on the metaphor, but I do think it's helpful to think of Iraq like Vietnam, like in terms of like a long war that people became increasingly disenchanted with. Obviously, Iraq had a much lower cost in terms of human costs because Americans were not drafted to go to Iraq. It was in the era of the all-volunteer force. And so though there were deaths, there were far less of them than in Vietnam. And, there's a lot of writing and thinking about this, but they were also very socioeconomically stratified. Like the all volunteer force is made up by like a much less democratic representation than a draft. And so people on the margins of American society were often the people who were dealing with losing their loved ones in this war. But I do think there is like the ambient sense that this was a failure. People do not like, there is like a strain going back a long time, and Americans like having some skepticism of going abroad in search of monsters to destroy, as John
Nice.
Quincy Adams put it.
Nice
So I
plug.
think there's, I don't know if you've heard of the guy, look him up. But I do think that there's probably a media angle to it too, that like we've seen. Well, I don't know. People watch the Vietnam War play out on television too. So I don't know. It's an interesting question.
I feel like social media might have something to do with it. I think like
Sure.
watching, we don't see as much of Ukraine, which I think is why
Yeah, definitely.
so many of the people who are crying out on behalf of Gaza where we see like children dying. Okay, so it's not an equal comparison, but the deaths in Ukraine are pretty horrific, and what's happened to Ukraine is pretty horrific.
The Ukraine thing is an interesting example too, because there's like no real understanding publicly of how many people have died, how many people have fled, like how devastating the war has been on Ukraine, in part also because the story of like how dire of a situation Ukraine is in would undermine the U.S. perspective, which is like, we just need to send more weapons and like Ukraine will prevail. Ukraine will achieve victory. Whereas like that was never really on the table, which is why early advocates of diplomacy said, that what's going to change after years is territorial lines and extreme human and infrastructural and societal losses. Not in a few years, Ukraine will have won this war or whatever. So I do think that's part of why people don't see as much of that. But I think social media could be a part of it. But I do think, talking about the Vietnam example, one of the reasons, we talked about this in, I think was it our first or our second episode with Andrew Bacevich, the actual costs borne by Americans because of the end of the draft make it easier to wage war now. Like it is easier politically because you're not sending any random American into the war. You're sending, again, volunteers who they signed up for it. So they can fight the war for us, and we don't really have to think about it. And if I don't follow the news accounts on Instagram or whatever, I'm not going to see about the U.S. bombing Somalia.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, it has something to do with it. I loved Andrew Bacevich's explanation of the Iraq War as an extension of Vietnam, right? This long war, right? This like unending kind of long militarization. But as that militarization of the Middle East came very slowly, very quietly to a sticky, horrible end, Americans did look back and say, and kind of like at the whole military picture, it does seem like there's a news story being told. In the media class, less so, but certainly, like, I guess what I mean is like the new media class, the podcast sphere, the TikTok, whatever, all these like this new media class sphere looks back at that and goes, uh-oh, what did we do? Like, what was that? And I think there's a little bit of embarrassment. Like, Americans kind of bought, we can win a war on an idea, hook, line, and sinker. Because, yeah, I know Americans really supported that war, but I just don't think we would support it again today, even though places like Israel are trying to push the same story to the American public. Like, we're fighting a war on terror. We're fighting a war on terror. And we're like, we fought a war on terror and it is not working. It did not work.
I think I'm maybe a little more pessimistic than you on that question, because at the
makes
beginning of
sense.
the
You have
at
brown
the
hair, I
beginning
have
of
blonde hair.
yeah, that tends to be a dividing line. No, but like at the beginning of Israel's war, the polling has gotten much worse, but
Mhm.
Americans were broadly
Yeah.
supportive of arming Israel, even as the signals were very clear
Pretty early
from
on.
the beginning of what was coming. And it's
Yeah.
for that reason that groups like the Quincy Institute were very, very early, calling for a ceasefire and saying, stop this before this genocide gets rolled out. And it did. And then also I think about people like David French, who was like, one of the people who helped sell the Iraq war, or Bret Stephens. They still argue that the Iraq war was a success because it removed Saddam.
Do people listen to them?
Well, I don't know if people listen to them, but they have very prominent roles.
It's so weird to me. Like, there's like this disconnect. Like, and honestly, I know like I'm part of like a very small bubble, and I recognize that, but like I just don't get it. Like, why are they still have these huge platforms when literally, like, Bolton is another great example. How is he still like powerful? He has had a huge platform for decades, calling for bombing Iran.
Yeah, well, it's because people. I mean, I think, we say like, who still listens to him? I think like an average person you talk to like either doesn't know who John Bolton is, or if they do, are like, oh, that Iraq was stupid, that was bad, or like, yeah, we shouldn't be doing coups in Latin America or whatever. Like, I do think there are plenty of people who feel that way, but Bolton has a contract with CNN. So what an average person thinks like holistically is a separate question from he gets paid by CNN to be on multiple times a day or a week or whatever, to talk about how only military strength from America brings peace in the world, and say that same thing over and over again, or to joke with Jake Tapper about the coups that he's done. And like, our media class doesn't find that offensive, and they don't look at the Iraq war and say that was an abject destructive failure that led to like this countless lives lost and like stabilization of the region and all of these things. They're just like, well, America did what it had to do. And also,
I guess if your goal is only to speak to the elites, and the elites, at least within the Beltway, and many of them now throughout Silicon Valley, so wherever tech is made, throughout a lot of, investment bankers, so on the East Coast, like across this country, the real elites do financially benefit from this kind of raw Americanism, not America first, sorry, Americanism that is hyper militant and always quote unquote innovating. So, I mean, because I just can't, I just don't understand. I like don't meet everyday people that are like pro-war. But again, I know I'm a bubble. And you're right. Like the support for Israel's action in Gaza have changed dramatically, right? And that change, right, signals like there was a much broader support, especially I think off of the images and horrors that we saw on October 7th. And then that had like a real lasting power. And our media class then, though, did fail to report on Israel's like response to those atrocities on October 7th, right? It only showed up on my social feeds, right? These very, like I'm saying, like these bubble makers, right? That showed me, oh, okay, wait, I'm sorry, something wrong is happening over here. I really didn't see that in the media, and the media wasn't pushing it. It drives a conspiratorial brain. But again, right, they're speaking, whether consciously or not, right, their actions are for, and their reporting is for an elite class. So when it's not towards, I guess, like a kind of populist or purely informational project. Like if news is no longer a purely informational project, you're going to have these kind of pro-war sentiments.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think ultimately, like, our elite classes are like incredibly insular. Like the people who Democratic politicians spend time with are other Democratic politicians, the people who like bundle their donations, the media friends in Washington. Like there just is not a lot of dissent at the highest levels. And so when it comes down to the decision-making class, they're often like living in a different bubble where they get to, you know, just repeat what other people tell them about war or what they see in a very narrow space.
This has gotten us away from like why both parties are kind of like the war party, and more about like why the population has become not the war party. But I mean, I do think that there is a trend towards questioning like unending war. Even if you look at the Republican numbers recently about Israel in particular, while the Republican numbers are still largely in support of Israel and support of continuing to arm Israel, if you break it down by age, younger Republicans are very critical and of this kind of automatic let's wage war everywhere line, and are very critical of Israel's war and are want to see some investment in, I don't know, their own lives vis-a-vis America, right? And so there is a change, and it's so deeply structural that the U.S. just simply can't break away from its automatic let's go to war, hegemony first, safety later posture.
One thing we haven't talked about, I'd be remiss to not talk about the material like interests at hand. Who gets rich off of peace? Like nobody.
Yeah.
Like
no, that's like what I've been trying to get to. That's such a great point. No one.
Yeah. No one gets rich off of peace.
There's no big funder of peace either.
There's no big
problem with so many political projects.
Yeah, there's no big peace lobby because you can't, there's no profit in diplomacy. There's a lot of profit in building bombs and selling 100%. Them. The U.S. is the world's #1 arms dealer. And so there's like a whole lot of people in Washington who are eager to tell D.C. about how if you sell bombs to this person, it will advance human rights, or it will be America first, or it will be whatever the hell the thing is that you care about. Just let me continue making and selling these bombs. And, so I do think there is a material aspect here, that a material driver to these decisions constantly being made in one direction.
Alex, I think that's a great place for us to leave it. I 100% agree with you, per usual. If you enjoy Alex's takes, you can follow him at
Alex Jordan ATL,
and you can follow me at CKAYE Rawlings on X. You can all please follow the Quincy Institute, Quincy INST, all over socials, Instagram, X, Twitter. This is the same thing, YouTube, etc. If you haven't liked and subscribed to this podcast, you are doing a huge disservice to me in particular.
Yes, it's personal.
It is personal. It hurts my feelings. So if you could please subscribe, and most importantly, leave a comment or leave a review is what they're called. Leave a comment on YouTube, etc., etc. All the disclaimers.
Thanks for tuning in, folks.
Thank you. Peace.